So you say your podcast, the BC Messenger, it's telling me about important research results from a scientist who's making important discoveries. Okay, here's a question. Has this work been peer-reviewed? Has it been published in respected academic journals? Our answer to those questions is no. Good heavens, no. Which leads us into a broader discussion on today's episode of corruption in the mainstream establishment that is supposed to be doing science. Things going on that many people today are completely unaware of. Join us today for our episode on corruption in modern science and why we are independent. Hello and welcome to the BC Messenger podcast. This is February 2026, number 43, episode number 43 of our podcast. So glad you have joined us. I'm here as always with my wife, Jennifer. Jen, it's been cold over here in central Illinois. We have had some low temperatures, snow. It's been a cold winter already.
We've had amazing displays of the northern lights locally.
Yes.
And we even had a small earthquake in Illinois last night. So we're having all kinds of natural phenomenon going on. But yes, the cold has been extreme. And Steve is not a fan of the cold. And so he's frequently commenting on it as he comes and goes in and out of the house.
I do try not to complain in the summer because I complain enough in the winter. It's cold. And I know I'm not a fan of the cold. But hey, you know what?
We're making it. Days are getting longer.
That's right. They are. It was 5 something the other day, and it was still light outside, somewhat light. And it's signs of hope for spring and summer.
Yes, it is.
I saw a day coming up. It's going to be 2 degrees is going to be the high here in Central.
Really? I don't look at the weather.
2 degrees.
I just take each day as it comes. I don't try to look ahead.
Well, anyhow, we're glad you're here today for this episode in February, and we've got some important things to talk about today.
Okay, chit-chatting aside, we are going to get on with our discussion that we have planned for today, starting out with an interesting question. As we were preparing this topic and reading some very lengthy articles and well-researched information, so I had this question come to my mind. I mean, what even is the goal of doing science? What is the goal? What are we trying to accomplish in this? I went to Chat GPT to ask my question.
Our modern day friend, always handy and sitting there ready
with an answer for you.
Yes.
I thought, well, what would, gathering from all of its information sources, what would it say is the goal of science? I was curious, didn't know if I would agree or disagree. So Chat generated an answer. It said, science exists to reduce our confusion about the world in ways that others can verify and build upon.
That's a good answer.
I liked it. I thought, well, yes, reduce our confusion about the world. That's good. That's starting out with the understanding that as humans, we're very, very confused about the world. We can be very sure of things and then find out we were completely wrong. And so we need ways to reduce that. We need ways to get closer to the truth, to advance reality, and do away with misconceptions. So in ways that others can verify and build upon. So somebody needs to be able to come behind you and do the same experiment, get the same result, and then take that and go further with it in further discovery, further reducing of our confusion. So that's a good answer.
Good answer, but there's the why behind it, right? Something's missing with that answer. Why are we trying to reduce our confusion about the world in ways that others can verify?
Especially as Christians, right? As people who want to see the kingdom of Christ expand in the world, we do have a why behind it.
That's right. And if we were going to add to ChatGPT's definition, it would be to add this on the end of it. We are doing this for the benefit of humanity, right? For the greater good. And ultimately, the big why is for the glory of God. So it is God's science, and it's God's world, and the whole goal of science is to discover what God has done and put into this world and how we can benefit our fellow man and glorify God in the process. That's what science is all about.
So it's good to keep this in mind. This is our goal in science, in the pursuit of truth in this way. And so we need to keep that in mind as we go through this discussion today about the prevailing culture in the mainstream. Publish or perish is a mantra that you hear often repeated from our academic institutions, and also, the very well-known practice of peer review. And I'm just going to say this right here at the beginning. We've gotten asked this question a lot. We've been in communications here for 6.5 years. We've been asked that question frequently. And my attitude always...
What question?
Are you peer reviewed?
Right.
Are you published?
We opened up with that.
And I would be able to point to Dr. Aardsma's bio, and here's some stuff he had published back in the 80s, early 90s, when he was a student, when he was a postdoctoral fellow, whatever. But no, since then, no. And I would try to bring up Galileo or something, but I would feel apologetic about it.
Right.
We really should be, but unfortunately we can't be because we're talking about Genesis and no one's going to review that. And so I've changed. I don't feel apologetic.
Not apologetic anymore.
Like you said at the beginning, after everything I've learned for this episode, good heavens, no.
We are not peer-reviewed, and we are not published in today's respected academic journals. And that's what we're talking about today. And that's why we're talking about this, because this does come up, and it is our template today in our world that we live in of how scientific research it progresses, how it moves forward, how it gets to be known. So hopefully today we've had an education.
Right.
In studying this for this podcast.
We really have.
And we hope to pass some of that on to you as well if you need it. Some of you listening may already know these things. But I suspect there's many out there who do not know what is going on today and how these things work.
And everything that we're going to discuss today is very well presented in a series of 4 articles that we will link in the show notes, and you can go and get all of any additional questions or anything you want to check out for yourself is all right there. But before we go any further, we should just go ahead and give our rundown. So you've heard about the feature topic. Our listeners know what we're discussing for that. We're calling it Corruption in Modern Science, Why We Are Independent. And then we will close out today with Helen's view. She's going to share about remembering Eldora, friend, mother, and grandmother. And that'll close our episode today.
For new ideas to move forward, a society must have free speech. When we think about having a free country, when we think about having our freedoms and independence, we sometimes don't realize what all that means. We think we just want to be able to do whatever we want to do. We want to be able to have our freedom to move around, freedom to own property.
Want to be able to go to church.
Right, and all of these things are very important. But sometimes we don't think about things like scientific research and providing answers, reducing confusion about the world, and benefiting fellow man and humanity for the greater good. Well, scientific progress comes when you have free speech, when you have scientists, people who have the freedom to be able to truly do research, not hindered in their research, and then to be able to take that research and publish it and let it go out to the society in a country with free speech. Societies today have systems for new ideas or scientific research.
Right. We do put systems in place as societies that are supposed to help, channel, get rid of false ideas and help channel truth out to the public.
Sure.
And so that's what has been set up in our institutions for quite a long time.
We do have to have order. We do have to have some kind of organization, some way to filter, right? What we call junk science and true science. But what happens when those well-established systems become, as very often things do in a sinful world, they become corrupted. When those systems actually stand in the way of truth and advancement. Many people do not realize, and I didn't until I began studying this more and getting into the work we do here now, that this is now happening in our country's academic institutions. This is what is taking place. Things have gotten to a point of corruption. It's out of control. Publish or perish. We keep seeing that phrase, Jen, as we've been studying this, reading this. It's kind of a new phrase to me. Publish or perish is the term that's put out there, and peer review. These have become roadblocks to truth, roadblocks to progress. Some scientists have seen their lives and reputations even destroyed through this corrupted system. And we're going to get into the details of what we mean by a corrupted system. Why? What do you mean? Now, other scientists learn to jump through the hoops. They learn how to work the system to accomplish their personal goals, career goals.
And then you have another segment of scientists. I'm not sure how big this segment is, but there are some who decide to leave the mainstream altogether in order to avoid a career, a life, spent trying to satisfy the system and deal with endless amounts of red tape because they want to do science. And so they go outside the mainstream, and therefore they have to become self-published.
Independent.
Right, become independent. They have to somehow fund their own laboratory. They
and so it has its own set of problems.
Yes, it's not like everything's just wonderful if you leave the mainstream, but what it does do is it allows meaningful research to take place, and then the results, the unadulterated, undiluted results, can be published, even if it is just to a smaller or limited audience.
That's right.
And that is exactly where we find ourselves here at the Biblical Chronologist. What I just described there pretty much describes where we are here.
And that's what we're talking about today, about problems that scientists today are facing with the major establishment, with the systems that are in place and have been for many years now. But how, as we have learned, the winds are changing. People are realizing, and scientists are coming out and speaking up against what is going on.
Somewhat of a movement is rising up about these problems that we're going to explain to you today. And that movement is partly the reason why we have this series of 4 articles that we're drawing on today.
And also why, as you said, we, the Biblical Chronologist, Arzma Research and Publishing, has a 31-year history of doing research and publication independent, being self-published. So if that's a question you've wondered in the past, if it's a question you've asked us and you've wondered, well, why does Dr. Arzma do things the way he does? Why is he over in the Midwest, in Illinois, out, here in no man's land, doing research in his own laboratory over here? Many of you know the story here. Gerald and Helen had the opportunity some years ago to purchase an old school that's right here in our area, old school facility. And part of the reason for that purchase was to build a laboratory, to have room to expand. Dr. Arzma for years worked in a small, and when I say small, I mean small, little single-wide mobile home trailer. That was his laboratory for many years, where he self-published, independently researched, and God gave him amazing discoveries.
And used every inch of space and more to accomplish some really astounding things when you go back and read through the research that was done there in that small little facility. But like you said, God blessed, and now
with very little money,
the lab space is continuing to grow and expand over there. All of this being done fully independently.
Independent, self-published.
I'll just mention the source for these 4 articles that we are drawing on today is called Real Clear Investigations.
Okay, let's travel on a little journey on this episode with, let's just say, a young scientist. Many of our listeners may not be familiar with the world of scientific research and what happens and the journey someone takes if they make a discovery. What does a scientist do? I thought about this. If you have something you want to say to the world, if you have a song, we've written some songs, and you think, wow, this is a great song. I want people to know about this. I want to get it out there. If you write a story, if whatever it may be, what do? Well, you can say, well, I'm going to start a website. I'm going to build a website here and show it to the world. Okay, well, most of us, if you've ever done that, you realize that very quickly that, you can put a website out, but it's one thing to create something, make something, discover something. It's one thing to start the process of trying to make it known, but then, it's a completely different ballgame to get it out. And it's the same in scientific work, we have learned and found out.
But there is a system that is set in place, and this is typically how it's supposed to work.
Right.
If you are a young researcher or a scientist in a lab, typically in a university somewhere, you're doing experiments, you're collecting data, you get results, you have information, you have maybe a new theory that comes out of the data that you've collected. And so you have all of that. And like I said, typically these are in universities where they
Right.
have the funding to have the labs and to pay the people to do the work. And so then what? Right? So let's take our listeners on a little journey here.
Let's say there's a gifted young scientist and he makes an unexpected discovery. He's working on a research project. Something comes along in his research that he's just like, wow, here, I have figured something out. I found this out. He knows that this challenges what has always been accepted, right? It always does. Discoveries always challenge the prevailing ideas and thoughts and assumptions in his field, but he's excited. Right? He's found something. He's realized something. He's made a discovery. He's excited of the importance of this discovery. So he prepares his findings. He gets it all together. He, what we call, writes a paper on it. And then he submits it. Again, we're just kind of going through the basics here because this was a learning process for me. I didn't know how this worked, but this is what a scientist will do. He submits his work then to a journal. That's how it works today. It would be usually an established journal. That's the goal. That's the hope of this young scientist who believes that strong evidence that he has here for this discovery is going to speak for itself, right? I mean, he's got what appears to him to be the truth. He has a discovery here.
New information.
That's right.
He wants to get it out.
And it's important
No doubt,
information.
This was part of his passion in going into the field that he went into, was to help advance and push things forward and hopefully, as we said, for the greater good, for the benefit of humanity. So
Right.
He's ready. He's got this. He's going to submit it for publication.
So he's going to now jump through the hoops because that's just the way it works today. You've got to be able to put it in writing, put it in a paper, have it published, get it in a journal. And so he does, but instead of meeting with excitement from others and people who are there ready to just bring him in and grab a hold of this as well, understanding, he encounters obstacles. He encounters editors, the editors of the journal, by the way, that he's trying to publish in, who dismiss his work as, this is out of scope of what we do. This is not agreeing with the templates that we have here. He encounters reviewers of his work, maybe people he works with in his university setting or in his field of work, who misunderstand what he's doing, who minimize the results of his discovery. They don't get it. There are long delays that he has to deal with.
Maybe he waits a long time to hear back from a certain journal and then gets rejected and says, well, I'll go to the next journal, and then waits again. And maybe it gets sent back for some kind of changes or alterations that don't really affect the message, but the goal of getting the information out is not happening.
Right. Now here's another obstacle. He's young. He has no reputation. He has no name. And that's part of the world we live in today. He has no credibility behind his name, so his work is judged. Young guy. There's a lot of skeptics in his field. People reform and revise what he has done, trying to conform it into the accepted, established way of thinking of the day. So that's what he's facing. This is where he's at. Hurdle after hurdle after hurdle. And meanwhile, he knows he has something.
Meanwhile, his superiors are saying, you've got to get some stuff published. Publish or perish. It has everything to do with the funding for their labs, for their department. So if that's not going to get published, do something else that will.
Right.
Right? And so what is this young scientist, this young researcher supposed to do with what he believes is very important information? What options would he have? I mean, one option is to chuck it and say, well, I guess it wasn't meant to be. It's not going to get out there and I'll just move on.
I can't build a career this way.
Yeah, exactly. This will never get me anywhere.
I can't make any money to support my family. I'm being threatened even now by the university that needs grants and by my team, who's I'm apparently being an embarrassment to. All of these kind of things is what he's dealing with, and he knows he's holding truth.
Or at least he knows he's holding very valuable information
right.
that others do need to seriously look at, but he is powerless to make that happen on his own. So I mean, we don't have to finish that story. You can try to imagine, what if you were in that situation? What would you do? I mean, one option is to strike out independently, and maybe eventually he would gain the success and the support and endorsements that he would need. Maybe not.
Right.
The story could end in a lot of different ways, but I hope that helps paint a picture for our listeners of what can happen and does happen. And there's a lot more than just what we described there that's going on today. But that kind of puts a little role play there in our minds of
how it works,
where you can find yourself in these types of institutions.
Well, and I think it also, what we're trying to say today is, it is just human nature that we don't just accept discoveries and research based solely upon evidence and truth. We just can't seem to do that. It always goes against our grain. It's not what we thought. We've had episodes on our podcast about this very thing.
I've been reading a book
from the past
since the first of the year, and life calmed down a little bit after the holidays, and I've been wanting to read this book. It's called The Story of Inventions, and I have gotten through James Watt and the steam engine, the invention of the electric engine and locomotive, Thomas Edison and the electric light, Enrico Fermi and the atomic age, the invention of spinning machines, the Jenny, the water frame, the mule, Eli Whitney and the cotton gin. I think that's where I am right now. And, every single thing I just read there were world-changing discoveries.
Right.
But more often than not, popular opinion was not on their side. I mean, sometimes these poor inventors and scientists were run out of town because the mob was like, men, not machines, was the mantra of one of these societies where this guy was inventing one of these spinning machines that changed the world for the better. But yet, like I said, he was run out of town and his house was burned down and all the spinning jennies they could find were burned, Right. So we don't have a good history as humans, as collective opinions go, on coming down on the right side. And unfortunately, that's exactly what we're seeing, not just corruption, but also just trying to get endorsements from the big names and the big publishers and whatever. More often than not, it's not going to happen if you are bringing in something new.
So there are hurdles no matter what you do. There are hurdles you have to get over if you have a new discovery, or you think you do, regardless. But what we're trying to hone in today and talk about mainly are the gatekeepers.
And the corruption.
That's right. And why the gatekeepers are doing what they're doing.
Now, before we go on any further, I'll just say this. Not everybody, of course, in their lab is going to have some world-changing discovery. Many people are just collecting data and studying some very narrow, specific thing that is going to be put out there to help other scientists build upon and increase our understanding. And so maybe those people have a better chance of getting through the system. recently, not that long ago, I had a conversation with a person on X, a gentleman who was asking about our peer review. And I was expressing to him, doubts about the system and the reasons why we aren't. But he was expressing to me that he had every confidence in the system and that it's worked for us, obviously, because things have advanced and things are continuing to advance. And this is how we do it. So I don't think we're on here saying that the system can never work and that it fails in every instance.
Sure.
Of course, even when something's corrupted, it can still sort of do its job. And so maybe that is still happening, but you don't really want to gamble with that. When you are on the trail of wanting to do real research and get real results, especially from biblical roots like Dr. Aardsma has done, you don't want to gamble with whether or not someone's going to give you space in their journal and whether you're going to get run out of town or not.
Stopped by a gatekeeper somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Anyway, I think what we're saying, we're not trying to paint with too broad of a brush. We know maybe a listener would say, well, that's not been my experience at all. I went through, this university and I had a positive experience in those labs and getting published and all of that. And I'm sure that still does happen. But we want to help expose where our system is breaking down. Because before we came on the mics today, Steve and I were talking that, yes, what that gentleman on Twitter was saying, we've had advancements. Obviously, our system's working. Okay, but the question to ask is, what advancements have we not had?
Right.
Because of the corruption that's happening. And when you think about the goal of science is for the betterment of humanity and to touch real people's lives, what if you're a cancer research institute and corruption is happening, as we're going to be describing? Then people's family members, people are dying of cancer.
Right. What if we could have had the discovery for the cure of cancer 10 years ago, 15 years ago? That's just one example.
There's another example that comes to mind very quickly right now, and that is because I don't know how many of our listeners have been following college football and the college football championship that happened where Indiana won, and they have this inspiring young quarterback who's 22 years old. Why would I bring that up as an example? Because Fernando Mendoza's mother is in a wheelchair because she has MS. And their family has been in the spotlight because of all this going on with this team winning the championship. And there's just quite a story there. But this beautiful lady who seems to be very inspirational and just has had such an impact on her son was diagnosed with MS when he was 4 years old. And she's in a wheelchair today. And so she's watches her son play football in a wheelchair. She's not able to stand, so the husband stays seated with her throughout the games. But that's a condition that affects your nervous system and causes your body to break down, causes you to have to live under much hindered conditions. And there's another area of research that obviously is affecting real people's lives. And obviously we want the published literature to be moving as fast as possible to help to remedy and cure these types of diseases, any disease. But that example just came to my mind because I've been seeing that family in the news so much lately. So although we are having advancements, what we don't know is where we have fallen short as a society and how much more we could have done. And you watched an interview that you said was basically saying that very thing, that we have sort of stalled out from where we were decades ago.
Yeah, I believe it was an interview with Peter Thiel,
founder of PayPal.
One of the founders of PayPal, and many other things, and Eric Metaxas. I don't remember when this interview was, but they were having a discussion about this very thing, and Peter Thiel was saying that in his opinion, and I don't remember how many years ago he went back, but he believes we had an era of major discoveries. We put a man on the moon. Serious advancements. But then, because of the gatekeepers, because of big science or big pharma, whatever,
big publishers,
suddenly the discoveries really not only slow paced, went down in number, but nearly stopped, and that we really aren't as advanced today as he thinks we probably could be because of all of these problems. And I think he's on a mission to try to give voice to more independent researchers and scientists and all of that, or at least he was at the time of that interview. But yeah, obviously there are big names and people who are in the know out here who see these problems and understand this. And because of corruption and making money and name recognition and building of careers and all of these kind of things, we are slowing down the progress of benefiting humanity. And, it's not just about trying to make people's lives easier and having better technology and better games on our computers and all of that. It's about medicine. It's about military and
reducing
safety.
Suffering around the world,
Right.
Learning how to grow crops better so more people can be fed and you name it. I
Right.
mean, science touches every area of human life, and so much of it is life-sustaining, life-giving types of work.
As an audience here who mostly is not very familiar with scientific research and how it goes, let's just give a quick rundown now of what it means to be published and peer review. What is that? What does that look like today? And then coming off of that, we'll be able to explain what's happening. So if you're going to have your work published, that means that the work of the scientist has been formally accepted, okay? If it went through the process, if it got published, if it has been peer reviewed, it has been accepted and made public by a recognized outlet. We would call it journal, right? Most often it's a peer-reviewed academic journal, and there's big names. I think we read there are 5 that are the big 5. If you get published by one of those, that's a really big deal, apparently. And it becomes a contribution to the scientific record. So that's what it means to be published.
There's an editor of the journal who is basically functioning as the gatekeeper for that journal. He reviews all the submissions. He sends them out to be reviewed. He chooses who the reviewers will be. The peer reviewers stay anonymous, and they're not paid. And the editor is normally of the journal isn't paid either, but he's doing it as a career move, a way to advance his resume type of a thing. Or, I guess because he believes in the cause of the journal. But if your paper is accepted, and many aren't, then this editor, he or she will send it out to be reviewed, get the reviews back, and then the editor still has the decision to make whether to actually publish it and go forward with it.
Right. So that's the peer review. It's examined, the methods, the data, the conclusions, it's checked, and then recommended by the peers for acceptance or to be revised or to be rejected. So that's what it has to go through that process first. If it is accepted, then that research, that paper, whatever, now becomes part of the scientific record. The work is archived. Other scientists can now read it and can now try to replicate it.
They can cite it. The scientist will do his own study. He'll cite your data, in his paper, that your data that you had published in another journal. So it's all being referenced and built upon and added in to our giant universal library of scientific knowledge, right?
Right. And an important part of this is other scientists can build upon it, right? So it's accepted as true. Now, this becomes a problem if what is being published isn't true, and we'll get into that. So then what's the next thing? Well, the scientists' ideas are now made public. That's what's happening and accountable. It's put out there, and then this gives to that scientist major credibility. They now are seen as a professional. They have now behind their name a published work in a major journal.
And the more times you've been published and in what journals you've been published, how many times your work has been cited, all of these things help to build your career as a scientist and give you a lot of endorsement behind your name and who you are.
So that's kind of the primary evidence that this person is a true scientist and they are really bringing out good stuff. Okay, so that's the procedure. That's in our own layman's terms, getting help from some research we've done on how this works. The work that the scientist has done has been examined by experts, accepted by the scholarly community, and now added to the shared body of scientific knowledge. That's the peer review process. And it sounds good.
That's what I was just going to say. That sounds like a great way to do things.
Right.
I love that idea.
And if we, you know what? Here's the deal. And this is not just with science. This is with a lot of things in life. If we were all angels,
right.
if we didn't have this little problem in society called sin and, corruption and selfishness.
That's right. And just
then this would work. Then we're all angels. Power corrupts, money corrupts, name recognition and self-promotion.
Every man is often out for himself, and so oftentimes we don't have a problem in conforming to a corrupted system for our own benefit. So that's what we are now going to get into, is that system that we just described to you. We're going to get into the specifics of where and how it's becoming and has become corrupted and is failing us in the advancement of science today.
Yes, and like you said, we are going to be looking and just briefly touching on 4 different articles that give a very good and clear explanation of what is taking place today in these realms. We linked to all these articles in the show notes if you would like to read them yourself from Real Clear Investigations.
They're well written, and they are packed with links and references to other places online. Very well documented series.
Yes. The first one from October the 14th, 2025, just this last year, is called Fraud Hunters Sniffing Out Bogus Science. Fraud hunters.
What this article is telling us in a nutshell is that we are being faced with an unprecedented amount of fake research papers.
Fake papers.
Being published. Data being published that is either fake or has been altered in some way. Why is this happening? There's lots of reasons, but it can boil down simply to the pressure that a scientist feels to get his name out there, and where he can go to organizations who will gladly put your name on a fake paper and get the fake paper published for you. There are other reasons why it's happening as well. But this article also talks about how people see this corruption happening. Maybe data is being published out of their lab and they know that's not correct. So they become somewhat of a whistleblower in their department or in their university, but then they end up being punished for trying to raise awareness of a problem. If there is an investigation, it'll usually happen behind closed doors because they don't want to harm the institution's reputation or the journal's reputation. If a paper is retracted or corrected, it's also done very quietly, but the number of retractions and corrections of research papers is sharply increasing. And all of this is, like I said, very thoroughly documented in this first article. But what the article basically says is we're having an ethics problem. We're having a rise of way too many people being willing to just put out fraudulent information or put their name on something to build their own reputation. So
that's what it's all about. Because a question that I had coming into this was, okay, again, explain to me why. Why are we having all of these? And I think the next article talks about paper mills, where they're literally just putting papers out, research documents, research articles with big names on them, and into these journals. Well, what is the reason here? Why is this happening? Well, I think you just touched on it and said it. It's about building careers. If peer review and being published is the way that the way that it works, then every scientist wants to be published. Every scientist needs to be peer reviewed in order to get his name out there, in order to not necessarily promote and put forward some great discovery that he's made or she's made, but for name recognition. Okay, so that's the problem with the scientists themselves. That's not always the case.
This article opens up talking about a molecular biologist who is now finding himself playing an unexpected role of having to expose the fraud of fellow scientists. And they're checking into where data has been manipulated or duplicated in different research articles. And it's hard to find it and narrow it down. The article goes into all of that. But a quote from this gentleman, Mike Rossner: "Science is about finding the truth, and an inaccurate representation of what was actually observed in a laboratory means that you are not representing the truth," said Rossner, a former managing editor of the Journal of Cell Biology. "This is harmful to the progress of science and to our society that depends on it." I mean, that's kind of obvious, right? We got to put out accurate information. In recent years, research misconduct is a nice way of saying, I guess, lying or fudging the data has tainted the country's most venerable universities, including Harvard and Johns Hopkins. To date, now this shocked me, to date, more than 20 Nobel Prize winners have had papers retracted by the journals that published them. A move often associated with misconduct. Anyway,
Right.
It goes through it all here, but this is the first of it, is that we are having more and more misconduct being reported in these different areas of scientific research.
So let me ask you a couple questions, and you could answer from our research. I'm still thinking about the whys. Okay, we just talked about why a scientist would do this. Why would a journal allow this? Why would an editor allow this?
Right. Well, we'll go into that with these further articles, but journals are coming under pressure to publish more and more. Sometimes some of these fake articles, fake data have attached to them some very big name scientists. So the name has been put on there fraudulently, so-and-so contributed to this article. And so then the journal goes ahead and publishes it. It's a little bit surprising to me, and it kind of makes you question how careful these journals are. But somehow this fake information is able to get out there. Yeah. And I think it is, of course, financially motivated on the side of the journal as well.
Right. And then there's the universities, the laboratories. What do they have at stake? Well, their grants, they're being funded. They're trying to bring money into their university. Of course, the reputation of their university and papers being published, work being put out.
There's a gentleman talked about, as I mentioned, the whistleblowers in these different institutions that end up getting punished themselves. Stephen Franzen became a whistleblower at North Carolina State University. His saga was chronicled by the local media there, and so his story got out a little bit more, became the target of an unrelenting retaliation campaign. He told Real Clear Investigations that his troubles began when, at the urging of his dean of research, he started working with two researchers who had just published what was considered a groundbreaking paper in the prestigious journal Science, which is one of those big five, Together, they would form a competitive team to win grants. So there you go. His supervisor wants him to team up with these guys who've just had this big paper published. We can get grants for our department, for our part here at this North Carolina State University. But this gentleman, Franzen, who was a tenured chemistry professor, along with a graduate student, dug into the paper and found several flaws in its central finding. After informing the two researchers of his concerns and getting no response, Franzen says he intended to send a correction to the journal, but the researchers objected, saying the data wasn't his to correct. An argument that Franzen found preposterous, and the dean sided with the duo of researchers, saying the university could be sued. Right. And so, undaunted, he did file a complaint with an integrity officer. They investigated the matter, sent a report to the National Science Foundation that oversaw the case because it had provided the grant. And here's what the fellow said. "Next thing I know, everyone top to bottom is upset with me because I'm going to cost the university money," Franzen said. "The dean went around telling people how terrible I was. If you're the whistleblower, you are the one who gets hurt."
Right. What a great example there. It just kind of sums up a lot of what we are talking about. A great example of the corruption. What are these people not interested in? The truth. They're not interested in finding new discoveries that will benefit their fellow man. What they are interested in is reputation, self-promotion, grants and funding, reputation of the university. This is the problem. This is the corruption with this system that we have in place of peer review.
The article goes on to say it took a decade, 10 years before this guy won a bittersweet victory, and eventually Science, a year later, so I guess 11 years into the whole messy issue, Science, this journal, retracted the paper. So it took 11 years and they finally said, okay, this isn't correct. But yeah, so you can see the various ways that corruption is causing problems here.
And not only is true information not getting out, but wrong information is getting out and being built on. And
trying to be. I mean, how are you going to build on somebody's false information?
Well, you're not going to come to a true conclusion if you are. I mean, so again, how much true discovery and advancement has been stymied because of these issues that are going on with our procedures and our processes today in science. So again, the whole point of this whole episode is to show you and explain why, no, good heavens, no, we don't. And Dr. Arzma has chosen years ago not to go down this road of peer review and publishing.
Right. As we go on and describe more of the incorrect information that's being put out, one advantage that the independent scientist has is that when he cites himself, I've had people say that, most of Dr. Arzma's research, he's citing himself. Now, not all the time, but he is building on his own past work. Well, at least he knows it's not fraudulent. At least he knows that what he has put out is, as far as he knows, is the honest, plain facts of the matter. And on a rare occasion, he's had to go back and maybe make a correction of something that was an honest mistake. But at least he knows that he's not building on somebody else's research paper that was fabricated.
Right.
That's at least, a good place to begin. Now, before we go off this article, we have to talk about this Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, because to me, this was one of the most glaring things that I read.
Yeah. Another example here of the corruption and people who have had to deal with it.
There's so many conflicts of interest, and an article was put out about research ethics. Oftentimes, outside groups are called in to review when there seems to be an ethical problem in the research department. However, this Dana-Farber Cancer Institute kept its recent review of an individual there, a CEO there. They kept the review in-house. This individual, Glimcher, and other Dana-Farber researchers had their names on an embarrassing wave of 31 corrected and 6 retracted papers. Science Journal retracted a paper co-authored by this woman, citing discrepancies in the data and a lack of confidence in the findings. Anyway, it goes on that they tried to deal with this in-house. It would be much more in the public's best interest to have it dealt with publicly and be transparent in such a high-profile case to restore trust. And, I'm like, this is a cancer institute, and we're putting out 31 papers in a year, 31 in last year, yeah. 31 corrected and 6 retracted. That's 37 total.
Yeah.
And we're trying to save people's lives.
Right.
I don't know whose specific fault these things are, but the buck stops somewhere that these institutions are having such a hard time with putting out incorrect research.
I mean, it really can make your blood boil. Many of you listening, maybe you've had someone who has dealt with cancer. Maybe you have. And you think to yourself, could there have been a cure for this 15 years ago, 20 years ago? We don't know that. But if this is the kind of stuff we're dealing with in our major universities and the processes that we have to try to move discovery on forward, well, then it's no wonder maybe that we're all asking ourselves, why can't we find a cure for this cancer? Cancer is just one example. But yeah, you can see the importance of what we're talking about here, the detrimental results of having a corrupted system, and things need to change.
The number of retracted papers, just listen to these numbers. In 2005, this one group that was trying to monitor this type of problem counted 139 total retracted papers globally out of, these thousands and thousands of academic journals. Then 10 years later, in 2015, it went from 139 retractions to 1,542 retracted papers. Then by 2023, that number spiked more than eightfold to over 13,000 retracted papers. And there was one specific group that really was heavily responsible for that. But there's a huge upward trend in having to retract results that have been published that are supposed to
have gone through this
generally quite trustable information.
This tedious process of being peer reviewed and published. I mean, if you've gotten to the point that you've been published, it's supposed to have gone through quite a filtering system and rigorous. And that many are being retracted, something's terribly wrong. Well, let's keep talking about why. The second article that came out in October 28th, 2025 by Real Clear Investigations is called Paper Chase, a Global Industry Fuels Scientific Fraud in the U.S. And here I think is where we were introduced to that term paper mill, where people are paying, scientists are paying money to some group over in India or over in China, somewhere online, to be an author. Websites are offering illegal services. Journals are publishing fraudulent articles. I still don't understand how they get away with this, because they must be very good at what they're doing, putting these things together that sound very legitimate. They will attach big names being listed as authors on papers that those authors had nothing to do with. There's a story in the article of I don't have his name in front of me, but a scientist, and somebody brought it to his attention that his name was attached to this particular paper that had come out and been accepted, and he said, I had nothing to do with that. I don't even know where that came from. But just an example there in this article of the kind of thing that's going on. You can pay to have a paper written and revised.
Right. I mean, that's so hard to imagine.
You can pay to have it published.
You're a young scientist. You need a paper written, and you need something that's going to get published. Come to us. Pay us. We'll get it done for you.
Even in a top-ranked journal.
And they look impressive. They seem to check all the boxes to where an editor of a journal somewhere lets it through. And that's hard to understand how that happens.
Well, again, they're being told to meet a quota, that you got to have this many published for this journal, and it's bringing in money and name recognition. One scientist that's in the article had this quote that these are fancy, quote, fancy pieces of rubbish. Just
is what these papers are that are being churned out
right.
by these paper mills. It's an industry that has sprung up where you can have your name put on a piece of work and have it published in order to build your career, but the whole thing is fabricated.
And what has even added fuel to the fire, apparently, according to the article, is artificial intelligence. That now these already what apparently are sophisticated fakes have become even more sophisticated through generated text, through artificial intelligence.
Okay, now, this second article, we got to read the ending of it. Jennifer Byrne is being quoted here at the end. She's from the University of Sydney. Earlier in the article, she's quoted saying, paper mills have become a huge business. We know little about the actual impact of paper mills on research, she says, but if scientists are building on bad information, they are wasting resources and not making progress in their fields. Again, that seems pretty obvious, but listen to this story she tells at the end here. Byrne agrees that publishers are still routinely fooled by sophisticated fakes. She was recently asked to peer review a cancer paper submitted to a journal at one of the big 5 publishers. As a leading expert in the field, Byrne found serious flaws in the complicated paper. which wrongly described the behavior of cancer cells. It was a typical paper mill product. Here's this quote, "a fancy piece of rubbish." Burns' peer review report to the editor was blunt. So she peer reviewed it. She went back to the editor of the journal. She said, "This paper must not be published. It's absolutely not true," she said. But they didn't listen to me. Instead, the editor asked the authors to make revisions on the paper that's now headed for publication. "Honestly, this drives me nuts," Burns said, "and this is happening at scale all around the world."
Amazing.
So the editor had the ability and the leeway to say, okay, I'm ignoring that review from her. She's saying this is absolutely false, but we'll go over here, we'll make some edits, and we'll go ahead and publish it.
Right.
So he or she, that editor, had the control of the gatekeeper in that situation to put that information out.
Yeah.
For whatever other motivations were there for that individual to go ahead and publish that paper.
And you may be asking, how are these paper mills doing this? Well, it's obviously a major undertaking that's been going on for a lot of years now. I just spotted something in one of the articles here. Let me just read this. These paper mills first appeared about 15 years ago, and many have evolved into sophisticated businesses able to produce complex papers with all the trappings of what appears to be real science. They appear to be hiring true scientists and including even lab facilities in their sales pitch. The basic model, this is a business model, to sell authorship slots, as we mentioned a minute ago, to scholars on a wide variety of topics from cancer to economics to education. They write the articles, create charts based on fabricated data, respond to queries from editors, guarantee publication in journals, index to essential platforms like the Web of Science. It's a wall-to-wall scam, and it is so convincing that journal editors are typically unpaid. You mentioned a minute ago, they don't have a ton of time to do what they do. They're easily deceived by these scams, and they are not cheap. These places are taking in big money that researchers are paying to be published in high-impact journals and for being the first listed author. We could go on about it. It's sad and terrible that this is happening, and thankful for these people like you're quoting there, Burns and others who are seeing it, taking a stand. Anyhow, let's keep moving on here.
The third article came out last November 19th, 2025, how the avalanche of academic papers threatens scientific research. This one is focusing in on the huge increase in the volume of papers being published in these journals, in the volume. There was an editor who led a mass resignation from her journal because they had been publishing, she said 12 or 15 articles a year was all they would publish in this high quality journal. They wanted to make sure they were giving very good quality content to their readership. And then suddenly the publisher of the journal started putting pressure on her and the other editors to really ramp up the production, like up to 60 or more in the next several months or something. And so because of that pressure to increase the volume of papers, she left and walked away from that position and took the whole team with her.
The increase is all about money for the journals.
Right. The push to publish more means that lower quality stuff is going to more easily slip in. Profit margins are huge for these publishing companies, and you can read about this in lots of places, but they are making a profit margin that most businesses never approach, like 40% or something. Even though, as we've already said, the editors, the authors, the peer reviewers are unpaid. Nobody gets paid for doing any of that. But taxpayer dollars are going to these publishing companies. Now, how is that happening?
Right. Taxpayer dollars.
How are government grants and how is government money going to the publisher of these big name journals or these different academic journals? Well, here's how it's happening. First of all, do you know you as an author can pay a journal to publish your work. They are called author processing charges. And so if you're desperate enough or you really want to get started, and you have grants, you are a researcher, you're in a lab somewhere, you have grants given to you for the research, for the work that you're doing there, government funded grants, then you can choose to take that money and pay to have your papers published. So there's that. That's one way the publishers make money. So it makes sense that if you're getting paid by the authors per article, that you would want to publish a lot more articles, because then that means you're generating a lot more income as a publisher. And then the other way is by subscriptions. Of course, people pay to read the content. But do you know who are the major subscribers to these journals? Are universities. Some universities spend millions of dollars on subscriptions to journals so that their students can read, the most up-to-date research coming out. Oftentimes, the university will even buy this huge bundle of journals instead of just going and selecting individual journals.
Where's the university getting all this money?
So how is that taxpayer dollars, right? Universities
grants,
get government
research
money
grants
to do what they do.
And so that's the money being spent to the journals. You can see this web.
Yeah.
And the corruption that's going on, the money being made, and it's a cycle.
The guy working in the lab, the guy head of a lab, is being pressured to publish papers, so we can get government money, because the more we publish, the more money we can get. And then the publishers are pressuring, we want more, we want to publish more, put out more, because the more we put out, the more money we're going to make. And so it's all money,
right.
It revolves around lining people's pockets.
And the
somewhere.
question is, who is going to try to find the truth? Who's the person out here who's actually trying to push discovery? Now, they're out there. Again, we want to be careful. We're not talking about everybody, but we're talking about the system, and this corrupted system that's just a total mess. Well, let's get very quickly into the last article. The fourth article, which came out January the 15th, 2026, very recently, is called "To Combat Academic Fraud, Scholars Confront Hallowed Tradition." Being published has become the standard for your value as a researcher. That is where the money is. That's how labs get grants. But people are trying to raise awareness, and this is good. This is a good thing. And this is partly why we're doing our podcast here. Right? Trying to raise awareness, trying to circulate petitions, trying to work to get this system changed. And that's what this article is all about. And the scientists that have come under tremendous pressure and how they're dealing with this.
This article tells a very sad story of a man over in the UK, in London, I believe, who was a researcher, a scientist, who was coming under tremendous pressure to get published. And eventually he ended up taking his own life, and then having some emails that were sent after his death that he had written that was basically describing, he said, these guys destroy lives. And so it's a very sad story. You can look it up. His name is Stephen Grimm. He was a professor of toxicology at the Imperial College of London. He did have a distinguished research career. He held multiple patents even. But after a period of intense pressure related to research funding targets, he had been under growing stress because he had not met specified research grant income targets set by his department. And of course, that's an extreme story. You can always tell a sad story, right? And tug at people's heartstrings. But I mean, it is sad. And somebody who probably had potential to contribute much, much more to his field ended up not meeting up to these industry standards and eventually fell into depression and had a very sad end to his story. But more broadly, just the standard that has risen up.
Publish or perish. Right.
Get your work published. Get it published.
Right.
And if the editors of the journals don't like your work, then publish something else. Instead of, what is it that I want to investigate, right? What questions do I want to answer as a researcher, as a scientist? God has given some people a burning desire in their soul to solve questions and puzzles and find answers to things that we didn't have answers to before. And so those people need to be set free to do that,
Right.
because they have so much to contribute to our world, and they don't need to be put through a system that's going to put roadblocks in their way every step of the journey.
And this is why, decades ago, Dr. Gerald Aardsma, who we work with here, Jennifer's dad, chose to not go this route, to become independent, an independent research scientist, not published by the major universities, not working under this corrupted system. We asked him, could you share with us a little bit about your thoughts, in your own words, about this whole system? And he has believed for many years it's deeply flawed, increasingly untrustworthy, that the peer review system has always been subjective, he said, editor-controlled, and that the rise of these paper mills, that now it's just unclear whether published papers are genuinely reviewed at all anymore, and that the editors really are the gatekeepers, often favoring authors based on reputation rather than actual content. So it's just a web of deceit and corruption. Dr. Aardsma told a couple of stories. One in particular was very funny. We won't take the time to tell it here, but of some experiences that other scientists had that he heard in a conference or something, talking about this problem and became aware of it at a younger age in his own career.
Now, as we've mentioned, deciding to be independent has its own set of problems. That is not the road to glory. It's not the easy road.
No, not at all.
Some of those problems, just to name a few, are how are you going to fund yourself? How are you going to afford to have a lab and to pay yourself to do research if you're not going to have a university paying you and employing you? And where are you going to get the lab equipment? And how are you going to keep all of this going? How are you going to afford to hire anybody to work with you and work for you?
How are you going to propagate it? How are you going to get the word out?
How are you going to get it out there? Right. I mean, most likely the New York Times isn't going to put your stuff on the front page. How is anybody going to know you're there? And if they do know you're there, why are they going to choose to trust you? Because so often trust comes from whose platform are you on. So yes, you're published in Science, in the journal called Science. Ooh, okay, that's a very prestigious platform. You must be really trustworthy. You're published on your own platform. Okay, now we don't know if we can trust you or not. I mean, that's just human nature. So these are the problems that are facing the independent researcher. But the roadblocks to getting answers and publishing those answers as honestly as you possibly can are not there if you choose to be independent, especially with the internet. The rise of the internet age, anybody can publish. You don't have to make books anymore. You don't have to have a printing press. You can publish online, and pretty much anybody can do that and at least get the information out there for whoever will come along and want to take advantage of it.
Make it open for public scrutiny and criticism, and those who really do want the truth. At least there it is. It's out there, and the Lord can put it in front of people as He wants to and sees fit. So it is another option.
And it's documented for anybody to come along and verify it and build upon it. And I guess as an independent researcher that believes that you are making important advancements, you just have to believe that eventually others will come along and build upon what you have done, as you have done your responsibility to document it and put it out in the best way that you can.
Right. And the truth is, the technology keeps advancing.
Yes, we're in better shape than we ever have been for information to flow freely from a variety of sources. It's not going to be easy, like we said, and the system still does have a stronghold, and it needs to be reformed. It needs to be improved, and that's what some of the people being quoted in these articles are trying to do. But they're saying, knowing it needs to be reformed and actually reforming it are two different things. But at least the process has started. And meanwhile, as I said, we are in better shape than ever for information to make its way out there.
Exactly. Well, hope this has been a bit of an education for you, as it has certainly for us, and also to give more of an understanding, if you've been following Dr. Aardsma's work, as to why he is independent. It's not just, they're just stubborn over there. They just want their way, whatever. It's not that, whatever ideas people might have about independent research, these are the reasons. These are the problems.
And I don't want to give our listeners the false impression, before we close this topic, that Dr. Aardsma just exempted himself out of the traditional system because he saw the corruption and he just wanted to rise above that and just take himself out of that system for, to like as a protest or for like moral reasons or something. He tried actually to stay in the system and to work through it back at the time when he began to make some of these more radical discoveries, what appeared to be radical. And he tried to get his work published, and he tried multiple times and multiple approaches, but ended up finding out that he was going to be unable to stay in the system because he was talking about Bible science research and was having it rejected as, this is not science, this isn't even pseudoscience, this isn't even speculation.
Right.
That's what the peer reviewers were saying. And so he began to realize that he was being forced out of the system, along with, of course, the fact that the system itself is quite broken, which is what we've described here today.
But being forced out because of gatekeepers. I mean, that's what we've been talking about.
And preconceived ideas, and,
right.
Peer reviewers were coming back and saying what I just mentioned about this isn't even pseudoscience.
Right.
Because he was making reference to things like Noah's flood.
There came a point of realization that he was either going to have to spend all of his time trying to jump through the hoops, trying to
get published.
Yes.
Trying to figure out what to say and not to say so the peer reviewers would let him through.
Or spend his time researching and in the lab. And he chose the latter, and this is why he's independent, why he's self-published. What we have over here in Central Illinois is a research scientist who simply wants to get at the truth, doesn't want to have to jump through over all these hurdles. And
time's too precious for that.
Right.
Life is short. We hope to see life expectancy increase with the aging research, but nobody has time to wait for public opinion or big name journals and editors to sway in your favor when you are trying to advance into brand new territory like we said, for the good of humanity, for the greater good, and just really for the glory of God.
You that listen understand and know that one of the main areas of research here at Aardsma Research and Publishing, the Biblical Chronologist, is in aging, to conquer the disease of human aging and coming at it from the only window that we have, which is the book of Genesis, the only window of people who lived hundreds and hundreds of years that we have, that we know of in the world. And how sad it is when loved ones, when people that we love and know fade away. They get old and they perish. And we have had that happen in our circle here very recently.
Yes, and so our main topic flows right into Helen's view, because scientific research is for the benefit of humanity. And right here at Aardsma Research and Publishing, there is work going on. There are results coming out that are directly affecting the lives of real people. And we want to see that increase 100-fold, 1,000-fold, even in this new year that we're in. But that's what's happening. And that's why we want to include sections on people who have been touched by the work that has been done here, remembering Eldora, friend, mother, grandmother.
Remembering Eldora, friend, mother, grandmother. I am sad to share that I have lost my dear adopted mom and best friend of 30 years, Eldora Bonges. Eldora went to her much-deserved heavenly reward on January 2nd, 2026. You may remember that I interviewed her for the January 2024 edition of the podcast. Eldora would have been 101 years old just a week later on January 9th, 2026. Her family had the graveside service here in Loda the same day as her birthday. I visited her grave the day after the service in the pouring rain, appropriate to my grief, brought her some flowers, and had my own little visit with her. Eldora had been on Dr. Arzma's vitamins for 8.5 years. She talked of how they helped her with her arthritis, especially her neck and shoulders. We believe they extended her life by at least 5 years and gave her very good quality of life up until the last few weeks. She lived the longest of any of her parents and 10 siblings. Their average lifespan was 74 3/4 years. She lived 26 1/4 years longer. Both of her parents had heart problems, and many of her siblings died of heart attacks. When I first met Eldora, it was an instant bonding of kindred spirits. Her family lived far away, as did my extended family, and so we adopted each other. She became a dear mother to me and an adoring grandmother to my children. She helped our son Matthew get his first dog, named Nellie, finding a breeder and picking up the dog and bringing it to our home. Matthew named his first daughter after Eldora. If you are listening to the podcast, be sure to check out the photos with this post in the show notes section. I wrote about Eldora in 2003 for my newsletter called The Mother's Companion, and here is what I wrote. I will quote from my newsletter. My dear friend and my adopted mom, Eldora, who lived just a few miles from us, decided to put her house up on the market. She wanted to move back to her old stomping grounds in Indiana, about 2 hours east of Loda. Eldora has been such a dear friend to our family. I'll never forget meeting her for the first time. It was about 7 years ago, in 1996. She had come to buy vegetables. It was late in the season, and there wasn't much left to sell but tomatoes. We ended up talking for about an hour. She was amazed at how similar our family was to her family when she was growing up. This was the beginning of a great friendship. Eldora began to call us her other family. Over the Christmas holidays, Eldora showed up at our doorstep, boxes overflowing with Christmas goodies for everyone, and all the fixings for monster cookies. Again, we talked for a long time. She was amazed to find that we had no Christmas tree and insisted that we had to have one. She gave me the money to go to a tree farm, something we had never done before, and picked out a tree, cut it down, and brought it home. Over the years, Gerald and the children helped Eldora with big projects and repairs around her home. Eldora's grown children all live too far away to help her with the many repairs that come with owning your own home. But Eldora was never to be outdone by any kindness done to her. Within a week or so, some parcel would arrive on our doorstep with goodies for the family. When Eldora's beloved poodle, Buttons, had to be put down because of old age, Stephen, our son, went with her to the vet, and I was at her house waiting when she got back. Eldora had dear old Buttons in a little box, sleeping his last sleep, she said. Tears were shed all around as Stephen lovingly lifted Buttons into the grave he had dug. Eldora and I held each other and cried together as Stephen covered the grave and put the flowers on it I had brought from my garden. Eldora came to all the children's birthday parties, spent some Mother's Days with us, and shared in many other special family times. We will never forget her kindness to us. Every gift she purchased with special care. Each card and wrapping was selected with great thoughtfulness. Her joy is to bring others joy. I'll never forget my children's faces when Eldora would walk in the door laden with treats for all. She was a wonderful on-site grandma to my children, filling a void that has been very real for them. Finally, Eldora's house sold. Our parting was coming. I helped Eldora put on a large garage sale before she moved. Eldora can't stand to throw anything away. Halfway through the garage sale, we began moving things to the free pile until pretty much everything was gone. What a relief that was to Eldora. On moving day, our home provided lunch for the movers. Half were Ardsmas. It was sad to see her beautiful home so empty. We had had so many good times there. I'll always remember the private anniversary dinner that Eldora put on for Gerald and me. The steak was cooked to perfection. There were many episodes of tears during our last visits together. Now Eldora's moved, happily settled in her new place. Eldora is the most amazing person I have ever met. She gives and gives and gives, and never thinks of herself. She is a master at conversation. When things turn negative, she quickly replies with a positive, making sunshine wherever she goes. Everyone who knows Eldora says the same thing about her. She has a servant heart beyond anyone they have ever known. When I grow up, I want to be like her. The family birthday parties aren't the same now. Her cheery goodwill is greatly missed. I have had to die to seeing her every weekend and to the regular sharing of our hearts. Sundays don't seem the same without her visits. For my birthday this year, Eldora gave me a lovely gold cross necklace in which she said, "This is to remember me by." I wear it often and think of our dear friendship. I am wearing it now as I type this on January 14, 2026. And that is the end of my quoting from my newsletter. Eldora and I shared our personal heartbreaks together, listening, crying, and praying. She was always there for me, and I think I was there for her too. There will never be another Eldora. I miss her already.
It's neat to think back over the years. When Steve and I were married, Eldora was present at our wedding as the only grandparent figure who was able to be there. We just watched our wedding video, saw her there, so lovely in a pink dress that day. We also have memories of her because she lived nearby my parents, and when Steve and I were in college, she would provide guest housing for Steve when he would come out and visit me during the summer, and we were falling madly in love. Eldora was always kind to open her home and feed you and let you stay there, and she was just a dear, sweet person.
She was. She definitely was. She seemed really old to me back then. And she lived to be 101. And attending her graveside service after Eldora passed, I thought it was amazing that her daughter-in-law, who had been with her daughter-in-law and her son up until her death, her daughter-in-law said that Eldora was mentally sharp up until her death. So even at age 101, and of course Eldora was on the anti-aging vitamins here for quite a few years, as Helen said there in Helen's view. So that's quite a testimony to that as well. So how wonderful that she maintained her cognitive abilities right up until her death, even at the age that she was. But we do miss her, and God is good to us to give us certain friends and acquaintances that we meet in this life. Our world has been radically transformed by scientific discoveries in the past. You read some things there a little bit ago out of the book that you're reading. Well, what does the future hold? Think about it. We've not reached it. We've not gotten to the pinnacle. We've not come to the conclusion of all things. There's so much more out here to discover. Where will we be in 10 years? Where will we be in 20 or 50 years? Why don't we consider abandoning the systems that impede? It's hard for us to do that, but abandon these systems that impede progress and take the most direct route possible to the truth and to advancing the truth.
We only touched on various little aspects of that series of 4 articles, but I encourage all of our listeners, go to those links, take the time to read those
articles. Share them, spread them.
You will be enlightened, and It will be very informative for you. And hey, thank you for joining us today as we've traveled through this unique discussion. Next month, we do plan to bring you more research results, Bible science research, real science, real Bible, real history, and real world here on the BC Messenger.